Well, hello, everyone. My name is Princess Moss. I am Vice President of the National Education Association. Our members work in K 12 public schools and on public college campuses. They work in Department of Defense schools. They are college students planning an education career and retirees who gave years of service to the profession. With 3 million members, we are the nation's largest labor union. I am thrilled to be here tonight for this powerful discussion. Before we get to that, we will begin tonight's conversation in the same way that we start all NEA convenings. We will ground ourselves by honoring native land. Please join me in the land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging that we meet on the traditional lands of the diverse peoples upon which the participants of this virtual briefing reside and work. I speak to you today from Alexandria, Virginia, which was served by the Powhatan, the Monacan, and the Cherokee people. We honor America's first people and all elders, past, present, and emerging, and we are called on to learn and share what we learn about the tribal history, culture, and contributions that have been suppressed in telling the story of America. Thank you. Tonight, along with activists and co conspirators nationwide, we are here to talk about student debt, how it was intentionally created, and how it worsens and widens the racial wealth gap. We know that by coming together, we can intentionally and forcefully tear it down once and for all. We know that we can create a powerful movement that can help more Americans move from simply surviving to thriving. No one has worked harder to eliminate student debt than Representative Ayanna Pressley, the Congresswoman for Massachusetts 7th District, and the first woman of color to be elected to Congress from her state. Congresswoman Pressley is the House's champion in the bicameral resolution calling on President Biden to use existing executive authority to cancel $50,000 in federal student loan debt. Her history of activism and commitment to public service is reflected in the advocacy and clarity she brings to her work. Every day, she works to create an America that is more just and more fair, an America that holds open the doors of opportunity for everyone. We look forward to hearing from Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley in just a little bit. For now, though, we'll hear from our colleagues here at the National Education Association.
Thank you so much, Princess, for your leadership and for your time, taking your time to get us started this evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Erica Taylor, and I am a senior research analyst with NEA. And I'd just like to take a few moments to address the question, how did we get here? Next slide, please. As most of you know, the task of financing college education has recently become more daunting for families who aren't wealthy. There are multiple factors that contribute to today's challenges, including declining support from federal and state governments or divestment from higher education that are passed along to students through skyrocketing tuition costs, resulting in families having to pay a larger portion of the costs that are now significantly higher. This problem is particularly difficult for educators because studies have shown that on average, they earn lower salaries when compared to professionals with similar levels of education. The research department at NEA recently conducted a survey of more than 2,000 educators that focused on the financial situation both before and during the pandemic. Our report is forthcoming, but I'll share just a few findings with you this evening. In our study, we found that younger educators, those who are between the ages of 18 and 45, were more likely to have taken out loans to fund their education than older educators, with nearly 2/3 of educators between the ages of 18 and 35 indicating that they'd done so. In contrast, less than one half of 46 to 60-year-olds took out loans. We also found, as this graph indicates, that younger educators tend to owe more than older educators, not just because they've had less time to pay them off, but because they're more likely to borrow and take out larger loans to fund their education. Next slide, please. While increasing costs of higher education are having an impact on current and former students nationwide, student loan debt becomes an even larger problem for some students of color. Longstanding and in some cases ongoing discrimination in employment, pay, housing, and the ability to maintain wealth building assets like land have all contributed to the race and ethnic differences in family wealth. For example, data from the 2019 Survey of Consumer Finances suggests that the race ethnic wealth gap remains relatively unchanged, with white families having 8 times the wealth of the average Black family and 5 times the wealth of the average Latino family. The ongoing discrimination that I mentioned previously still occurs in lending practices as well, including higher education. Recent studies have found that Black and Latino students pay more for borrowing the same amount of money for college as their white counterparts simply because of their race, ethnicity, and or the type of school they attend. For example, if they attend a historically Black college or university or a minority serving institution. As I mentioned previously, teachers are paid less than those in other professions with similar amounts of education. This phenomenon, known as the teacher pay penalty, may be partially responsible for teacher shortages and the lack of diversity among the existing teacher force. Also, data from the US Department of Education indicated that many teachers of color earn on average less than their white counterparts, with Indigenous teachers earning the least in salary. As this slide shows, our study also supports existing research on student loan debt and its disproportionate impact on educators of color. As this graph shows, Black educators were significantly more likely to take out student loans. Next slide, please. Additionally, Black educators report having to borrow more money on average than both Hispanic and white educators. Next slide, please. And at the time of our survey, Black educators were more likely to not have fully paid off their loans, with nearly 3/4 of them reporting that they still had a loan balance, as compared to 64% of Hispanic Latinos educators and less than half of white educators that we surveyed. Now, it's important to note here that all of the educators in our study who said that they had not yet paid off their loans, for them, the average of the current debt was higher than the amount that they initially borrowed, regardless of race or ethnic group, which means that they're all struggling to pay off the loans that they have not yet completely paid. Next slide, please. So in sum, student loan debt is a national crisis with far-reaching impact into all families and communities. Institutional racism has exacerbated the negative effects of this crisis, and some studies suggest that student loan debt is one of the factors associated with the lack of diversity in the teaching force. Therefore, eliminating student debt and fixing broken loan forgiveness programs would go a long way in terms of helping our educators to afford basic needs and remain in the profession. Now I will turn it over to Eric Harrington and Ronnie Lau, who will discuss the work underway to address this issue and how you can help.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Erica. Hi, everybody. My name is Ronnie Lau, and I am a federal lobbyist with the National Education Association in the Government Relations Department. And so I would love to take some of the time right now to talk about what has been accomplished so far under this new administration on a federal scale and what is going to be hopefully done in the near future for student debt issues. So I want to start off and talk about how the landscape has obviously changed in 2020 after the 2020 election. This gave us a pro-public education White House, a Department of Education, and Congress. Obviously, this is insurmountably about how amazing this is. But I really want to turn our eyes on this picture and notice in this picture that it's not a picture of the DC elected officials. It is a picture of us and NEA members. And every one of you helped us elect these individuals to get into this position to help us provide a pro-education environment in federal government. And now we need to make sure that we hold them accountable, and we need to do the things that we have elected them to do. So obviously, despite the challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic have provided, the 2020 election, we had the largest turnout in voter history in the 21st century. 17 million people voted more in 2020 than in 2016 by comparison. 73% of all voting age citizens were registered to vote, and 67% of all citizens of age 18 or older reported for voting. So it's a very good gap in terms of those who are all registered to vote. And then, of course, President Biden received more votes by more than 81 million votes, which is the most in any presidential candidate in history. So obviously we made strides in terms of voter turnout and making sure your voices were heard. And now we need to make sure we act on it and making sure that those individuals that we've elected act on it. Next slide. So to start talking about federal action in Washington, the first thing is the American Rescue Plan. And this may be something that folks have heard recently from the past couple of months. This was President Biden's COVID relief package that passed in Congress in late March. And this was a 1.9 trillion stimulus package that included the single largest investment in public education, and that's in history. That is just truly amazing that we're getting such a huge infusion and investment in public education. This is something that we at NEA have been advocating for such a long time. And it's so great to see this type of commitment to public education from this new Congress. But the most important thing from student debt provisions is that the American Rescue Plan makes that any student loan forgiveness passed between December 2020 and January 2026 tax-free. Typically in the past, any forgiven income through debt would be considered as taxable income, with some exceptions like public service loan forgiveness. But this was a huge issue in terms of what folks thought in terms of broad-based loan cancellation, and clears a major hurdle of what folks thought might have been preventing President Biden from enacting broad-based debt cancellation. So this clears a huge hurdle and hopefully is a sign of something in the future. Next slide. And the White House has also done a couple of things in this space also as well. As most folks, I think, on this webinar know, the president has campaigned in support of $10,000 in student loan cancellation for all types of federal borrowers in the past while he was on the trail last year. But he has advocated that this should be done through congressional action. While folks from us and also our allies in this space have advocated that this should be done through executive authority, which we fully think that he has the power to do so. The Department of Education also paused student loan interest and collections for defaulted federal family education loans, or FFEL loans, which helped 1 million borrowers. The department also rescinded a partial relief formula and approved borrower defense claims, providing an additional $1 billion in debt forgiveness for individuals who were cheated by nonprofit or for-profit institutions. And then finally, now where the presidency is at, is that in April, President Biden asked Secretary Cardona to prepare a memo talking about the legal authority to cancel student debt. So they're still clearly exploring it, despite he is a campaign that it should be done through congressional action, but he is exploring the options of whether that this can be actually done through executive authority. And I'll actually pause here because I know that Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley has joined us, and I would love to turn it over to her for some of her remarks for us. Thank you so much for joining us, Congresswoman.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Okay, mic check, mic check. Okay, here we go. And thank you for the scheduling accommodations here. I was stuck on the House floor, but I'm glad to be with you now. And obviously, this is an issue that I've certainly been banging the drumbeat on for a very long time. For 1 second here. Here we go. It's not that I don't know what to say, it's that I have too much to say. So I want to make sure I stick to my notes here. So thank you again for that warm introduction, and again for the scheduling accommodation, and for your consistent dedication, to our most marginalized students. And thank you to the members of the NEA. Your unwavering commitment to the success of students is so essential to the vibrancy and to the growth of our communities and our young people. This year has been a difficult one. I know that's the understatement of the year. We have in the midst of it all, though, we've pulled each other through in the face of the unthinkable, in the face of the unprecedented. And our educators have truly been a lifeline for our students and our learning communities. It was clear before this pandemic, and it's clearer now still. We must cancel student debt. Now, this isn't a trendy idea. This is not some talking point. This is not a campaign slogan. Canceling student debt by executive action is one of the most effective ways that we can provide sweeping relief to millions of families, help reduce the racial wealth gap, and begin to build the groundwork for an equitable and just long-term recovery. For generations, the drumbeat for Black and Brown families has been go to college, get a degree. That is your way up and out, foundational to any meritocracy. And as the cost of higher education has skyrocketed, the message to families in poverty has remained, make significant financial sacrifices to put your loved ones through college. That is your ticket to intergenerational wealth, an opportunity to break cycles of poverty and an investment in your earning potential. And that is true for some. However, the truth is that the nearly $1.7 trillion student debt crisis is one that disproportionately impacts Black families. Due to systemic racism and generations of policy violence like redlining and employment discrimination, Black families have been systematically locked out of wealth building. And the student debt crisis is a result of failed policy choices. Failed policy that has resulted in the chronic underfunding of our nation's HBCUs, community colleges, and state universities. The same institutions that have historically been our engines for economic mobility, but have instead had to raise tuition to cover skyrocketing costs, forcing Black families to borrow more to foot the bill. Failed policy that has allowed an entire predatory for-profit college industry to make record returns off the backs of our lowest income and most vulnerable students, leaving them with heaps of debt and low quality degrees. As a result, Black students have to borrow at higher rates just for a shot at the same degree as our white peers. Not only are we forced to take on more debt, stagnant wages and discrimination makes it harder for us to repay and 5 times more likely to default. And as someone who knows what it is to lie awake at night, panicked over a student loan in default, this issue is deeply personal to me. These defaults have catastrophic consequences for folks' credit profiles, can result in garnished wages, tax returns, Social Security, and even disability income. In some states, defaulted student debt can result in a revoked teaching certification and driver's license. Persevering to achieve an education should be rewarded in this country, not punished. Pursuing education should not exacerbate the wealth gap. Due to the pandemic, federal student loan payments have been paused through to 2021, and the benefits have helped to see families through an incredibly difficult time, proving yet again that canceling student debt is good, sound, effective policy. Approximately 50 million Americans are counting on our advocacy to ensure that President Biden cancels student debt. If we want people of color, low-income individuals, and women to purchase a home, to build a business, to choose a career, then we must continue to fight for broad-based, across-the-board student debt cancellation. That's why, in partnership with Senator Warren and Majority Leader Schumer and other colleagues, I introduced a resolution in Congress calling on President Biden to take executive action to cancel up to $50,000 in federal student loan debt and laying out a pathway for him to do so. With the mere stroke of a pen, President Biden can provide direct relief to tens of millions of families across the country, help close the racial wealth gap, and set our nation on a path to a robust, long-term, equitable recovery. President Biden can and should use his executive authority granted to him by Congress through the Higher Education Act to issue broad-based, across-the-board student debt cancellation. We won't let up this fight. It is going to take all of us to continue organizing, mobilizing, and speaking out to ensure the president meets the moment and is responsive to the diverse and multi-generational movement that elected him. I stand ready to continue fighting alongside you on behalf of the students and families impacted by this student debt crisis. Thank you for your time. and most of all, for your solidarity.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. You are truly a champion that we have in Congress for advocating on this issue, and we are so happy for you to join us today and speak to some of our members about how amazing work that you're doing right now in Congress for us on our behalf. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, everyone.
Great. So now if we'll get back to the slide that starts with immediate and broad cancellation, we'll start back from there. Perfect. So I wanted to now talk about what we at NEA have been calling on the Secretary of Education and the Biden administration to be doing and what our asks are. I noticed that there was a lot of talks in the chat that talked about how $10,000 and what Biden had been advocating for is not nearly enough. And simply put, we at the NEA agree. We, like the Congresswoman, are in favor of canceling student debt for $50,000 for every single individual. This does not exclude you. It does not mean what type of loan that you have, when you took out a loan, when you went to school. It should not matter. We believe that it should be a broad-based debt cancellation of $50,000 or more. And our allies are all united on this front. And we are very much in support of the Congresswoman's resolution to do so. And now some folks may be wondering, that might not be all of my debt. And so this is the second part of our ask. We are also asking the Secretary of Education to keep the promise of public service loan forgiveness. And public service loan forgiveness, when it was first created over 10 years ago, was a promise by Congress. It was a promise to folks like you as our public service workers, our public service advocates out there who have provided 10 years or more of service. And simply put, if you provided those 10 years of service, that decade, you should have your loans canceled. And obviously, we know that many folks have not gotten that done. We know that 98% of folks have been denied from public service loan forgiveness, and only a minuscule 2% have actually acquired loan forgiveness in this time frame. And so how we're viewing it is that we have the $50,000 in broad-based loan cancellation, obviously in a time of an economic recession during COVID-19. This does a great way in terms of providing a massive amounts of relief to all types of individuals, provides an ability for those to reinvest their spending into their communities and help with the nation's growth in this time of this recession. And then, of course, after that, we do the promise of PSLF to cancel the remaining amounts of your debt through that rate. So those are the things that we have been asking for at the NEA, and this is what we'll continue to push the Biden administration and Secretary Cardona to do. Next slide. And so federal action obviously has been swift from some of our asks. We know that from day one, President Biden continued the suspension of the federal student loan payments all the way until September 30th of this year. And he did that through executive authority, continuing about what the student loan interest rates and payment pause that had happened from last year at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then, as we mentioned, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and multiple others, other champions in Congress are leading on a resolution right now to push for that President Biden has the executive authority through the Higher Education Act to cancel $50,000 in federal loan student debt for every single individual. And then most importantly, NEA has been leading the front on the public service loan forgiveness charge. We sent a letter to Secretary Cardona earlier this month, and we asked for, one, to fix student debt, the student debt issues that are associated with the program. But most importantly, we need to hit the reset button and we need to cancel student debt for those educators who have provided 10 or more years of service. Simple as that. It's a great thing to obviously fix public service loan forgiveness, but the most important thing is that if just fixing the program does not help restitute or do anything with the process to fix those that have been denied or haven't qualified for the program thus far, of that 98% that have been denied. So the only way we can do that is we need to cancel student debt in its entirety for those who have had 10 or more years of service in public service. And that provides a reset button and obviously owes them the promise of what Congress had originally intended with the creation of public service loan forgiveness. Next slide. And we know our advocacy is working most importantly. This is a fantastic picture. Tonight we're joined by Sean Manez and James Stewart, who are two NEA members that participated in a fantastic roundtable with Secretary Cardona to talk about the problems with public service loan forgiveness. And I'm so excited that they're able to join us today. I'm actually going to turn over to my colleague, Eric Harrington, who will introduce them, and they will talk about their experiences about what they talked about with the Secretary of Education. So Eric, to you.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And thank you for, you're sharing your stories and your experiences in the chat. And one of the things that we want to make sure we all leave with tonight is that you know that that we didn't get into this situation, you didn't get in your situation by accident. This system has been rigged and built to trap you in student debt. And a lot of promises have been made to us. And one of the major promises that was made to you was in 2007, Congress said, if you work as an educator and serve your community for 10 years, we're going to cancel your student debt. You can count on that. And what we know is that as of today, 98% of public service workers who've applied for forgiveness under PSLF have been denied forgiveness. And to us, that's just unacceptable. We also know, and many of you have been leaving this in the chat, so share those stories in the chat. If you're someone who's worked over 10 years and you were told that you were going to have your loans forgiven, you haven't, go ahead and share that with all the attendees so that we know that you're not alone. If you owe more, if you owe 50,000 or more, share that too. If you owe more today than you ever borrowed, share that. If you are looking at retirement and you're trying to put your kids through college and you still have your student loans and you're borrowing for your kids, share that. You're not alone. And so that's why, to Ronnie's point, we have been adamant that this system needs to be broken down and rebuilt from the ground up. And from our view, at least two things have to happen before the rebuilding can occur. Number one, at the very least, the Secretary of Education, the very handsome gentleman in the middle of the screen there, smiling, should use his authority, as the Congresswoman just talked about. He has, in our view, legal authority today to flick his pen and cancel $50,000 of student debt for everyone. So I see a lot of questions. Okay, what about that? What about the rest of us who've been looking at public service loan forgiveness? He should cancel $50,000 for everyone. And in our view, he should keep the promise of public service loan forgiveness. So our view and our ask to him, that has been joined by literally tens of millions of workers, hundreds of organizations now, have asked him to cancel the student debt of every public service worker who served their community for 10 years or more. We don't want to hear about this loan, this payment, that payment. You were in forbearance here, you did this, that. No, all of these technicalities have just created burdens and hurdles when the services haven't been straight with you, when the Department of Education hasn't administered the program correctly. That's our ask. Cancel all our debt for 50,000 for everyone, and cancel debt for educators who have served their communities for 10 years or more in total. Now, the only way this is going to happen is if they hear from us, and they have to hear a lot from us. And so we're going to encourage you to tell them. But I want to introduce two of our educator leaders who on Friday spoke with the secretary and raised these very issues. And so James Stewart, I'll introduce you both first, and then I'll have you guys take over the mic and share your stories. James Stewart is a science teacher from Maryland. James is, y'all, in the old days, we'd get around, a table or a bar, and, everything that can possibly happen in the student debt system, it feels like that James has been put through that ringer. And so he shared that story with Secretary Cardona. Sean Manis is actually one of the rare 2% who had his loans forgiven under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And Sean's success story in many ways teaches me just how broken the system is. Sean had to enlist a U.S. senator, had to use FOIA requests, had to have lawyers, including myself, who represented him before he could get what was his legal rights under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness. So with that, let me introduce you. I'll first start with James. James, can you share a little bit about your share with us a little bit about who you are and your student debt story with the participants tonight? Take it away, James.
Certainly. Hi, everyone. I am James Stewart, a science teacher from Maryland. And when I left the meeting with Secretary of Education, Dr. Cardona, about student debt, I felt relieved that someone was taking leadership in fixing a failed program. Congress had promised in 2007 to cancel the debt of educators who taught for 10 years. It has failed to keep its promise to many of us educators, including me. I had started a graduate program while employed at a Title I district school, and I had served several years in teaching while attending the graduate program. I took advantage of a sabbatical leave granted by my district to have 1 year focus on graduate school. And when I had returned, I had resumed a position at another school of the same district. But unfortunately, the circumstances disqualified me from enrolling into the public student loan forgiveness program. For all the years of service and teaching, why should I have been penalized over some stipulation? It is frustrating to be subjugated to certain technicalities, stipulations, or red tape of bureaucracy. I told the secretary that we need to fix the PSLF and cancel student debt for educators. And he was very receptive to our stories, but now you need to tell him too. Thank you for this time.
Sean, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and share your student debt story?
Absolutely. I mean, as Eric had mentioned, I'm one of the lucky 2% that actually got it, but that involved, of course, sending forms all over the place, trying to get, getting FOIA requests that never went anywhere. And they're supposed to provide, Freedom of Information Act requests. They're supposed to provide this information to the borrower, and that went nowhere. Finally, my senator, Senator Booker, I'm from New Jersey, his office was able to get me all the records of my payments. And because I had the records that I needed from the senator's office, I was able to move forward with the lawyers at NEA, which Eric over here, Eric Harrington, is in charge of. And they put together this whole dossier and also included this an intent to sue, right? A demand letter saying that we were going to sue Fed Loan. And finally, after all of that was done, is when Fed Loan actually reacted to my case, and eventually it was forgiven. But I have the same stories about forms that went missing, forms that were submitted, but they don't seem to even acknowledge that they got it, even though I uploaded it to their website themselves. They would send the forms back for small errors. When I sent the new one in, they wouldn't accept the new one. I mean, all of these things had happened to me. And I'm appreciative to the NEA. What I did say to Secretary Cardona was that my case illustrates how broken the system is. Now, just in my little circle of teachers that I see on a day-to-day basis, there are multiple teachers who have told me about similar stories. And I mentioned them to Secretary Cardona. And the secretary seemed to be receptive to what we were saying. It was clear that he was trying to listen to the real stories and what's happening. And as James mentioned, we asked for all student loans to be forgiven for all educators that have been working more than 10 years, because I know that there are teachers that have been working much longer and haven't gotten any of it forgiven. And we shouldn't need this big amounts of paperwork in order to get this done, because I mean, come on, there's a button that we can click on that connects the records to the IRS, right? They have all those records. The PSLF goes by the employer, so they have all of our records. And why can't they just look at that and have this done a lot easier than having all these redundant forms going this way and that way? So that's something that we asked. So yes, that's pretty much it.
And then, so let me ask you just two more questions. Same one question for each of you. What did the secretary commit to you, if anything? What did he say he was hoping or planning to do about this problem?
I don't think he made any commitments, but what he did commit to was that he was trying to look at the problem. And my impression that I got from him was that he was genuine in trying to fix the problem, to better streamline it, to make it in a way that is more fair and cut away the red tape. But I mean, what form that will take, he didn't clarify. He said that ultimately, what I heard was, yes, I know this is a problem. I've heard what you're saying. I am on it.
And James?
I was gonna say that, yeah, he's very much aware of our experiences and what's going on out here. And, you know, as Sean had said, what we brought to him, he was able to really just see just how much it affects our lives. And that really, like I say, the bureaucracy of it, the technicalities, all this stuff you got to go through, all these loopholes and hoops you got to go through, how it really can really frustrate a person. And when you're in a situation where you're trying to work, you're trying to, you know, you're going to graduate school, that's a lot of pressure. And it really does cause problems and hindrance in your life. And then even after, because of this great debt that you have, not to mention the fact that the interest rates on the loan. So, you know, you go in with a certain amount, you pay off, or you have a certain amount that's just paying for your school. And then as forbearance and time goes on, then you end up with this great debt of interest. So it's just unfathomable. It's just difficult to deal with. And so I'm so glad that he was able to listen to us, and not only that, gave me the feel that something's going to be done. And that's what's important. So I'm looking forward to seeing some progress here.
All right, last one. I'm almost out of time here, Sean.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, you know, we also talked about the emotional impact that this had on our lives. And the secretary seemed to acknowledge our emotional impact, and that also the fact that we're not asking for, you know, to live in luxury. You know, we're trying to get mortgages, and we're trying to pay off, you know, get childcare and all that kind of thing. It's very modest requests that we have, and just improvement of our lives in general.
Well, thank you, Sean and James. And as I told them this, I'll say this publicly. When they were in that meeting with the secretary last week, they were speaking their stories, but I can see all y'all in the chat, and they were speaking for all of us, and they channeled you and shared, you know, their stories as a representative of all the stories that you all are putting in the chats. So the secretary has heard from them. Now it's time for the secretary to hear from you. Can you put up the slide on? Next slide. We have an action where you can go and make here we go, neaedjustice.org/debt action. And you can do, and we really need you to, the secretary has to hear from you. You need to go to this website and do what Sean and James did last week. Tell the secretary your story. Tell the secretary to cancel student debt for everyone. Tell the secretary to keep the promise of public service loan forgiveness. As James and Sean mentioned, he said he understood that this was a problem. Quite frankly, I think he was emotionally moved by Sean and James's story, and he said he's working on a fix. And so the time is now. I see there's questions in the chat. Can we do this? Can we get student debt forgiveness and cancellation? I think the answer is it's up to us. It's up to us to come together and implore the secretary to do it, and that should be our demand. Okay, I'm seeing. Let's see. Oh, and then let me just go to the next slide then. And so I want to kind of pull this all together. So one of the things that we have to do, which has been much of our conversation tonight, is we need to fix this like at a big scale. And the way we do that is by what's happening now, by first organizing, winning elections, making demands of this administration, telling our stories, speaking out en masse. But the other thing at NEA that we have done since the beginning of our student debt work in earnest in 2019 was a commitment that while these big problems were going on, we needed to come up with big solutions. At the same time, we were committed to doing as much as we can for every single member. And that is what we've been doing over the last year or so. You can go to neamb.com/getnav. If you are an NEA member and you can log in and you go to that website and you can check your eligibility. We have contracted with like a TurboTax kind of firm to provide free services to our members. And this is your dues in action to help you manage your student loans. And I see all the questions about the paperwork. You didn't dot this I, you didn't cross this T. You didn't. This organization and this website will fill out all the forms for you. Will they literally will get on the phone with the servicers with you and hound the servicers. And over the last year or so, we've been able to get well over $1 million of our members of educator debt forgiven. And we've literally got $250 million on track for forgiveness. So all the technicalities, these people are the experts on technicalities, and they can help you navigate that system. So it's neamb.com/getnav. If one of the other panelists can put that in the chat, that would be great. neamb.com/getnav. So if you're an NEA member, use that right now. So those are the two big action pieces for you. Join the big struggle to make sure that we cancel debt at a large scale, and go ahead and take advantage of the student debt navigator that NEA has, so that and I see people asking questions about private loans too. They can help with private loans as well to help you get on track for whatever forgiveness that you may be entitled to. And with that, I don't know if we have time for questions. I think we are very close to at time, and I think I've tried to answer a few of them as we've gone along. If there's any other questions that we have, you can try to get them in the chat, and I can try to answer a couple more in just the last minute or two we have. Okay, seeing none, I want to thank you all. Parent Plus, Savvy can help with that, and the forgiveness programs. Some apply to Parent Plus, some don't. The cancellation, I think that the devil's in the details, but the cancellation ask would include Parent Plus stuff as well. And that's a story that we have shared with the secretary that he understands well. The stereotype out there is that student debt is a young people problem, but we know, and many of you in the chat are saying this, many of us are carrying this into our retirement, and that we just got to figure out a way out of that. So two big asks. Go to the Ed Justice website. If someone could put that in the chat, tell your story to the secretary, and go to this NEA Student Debt Navigator and get help right now with your own debt. And with that, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all of our panelists. Thank you to Sean and James. Thank you to the Congresswoman, and thank you to Princess and all the organizers of tonight's event. Thank you all. Good night.